My name is Lila Jensen, and I used to believe that love could fix everything. I was 23 when I met Richard. Tall, poised, a rising star in corporate law with a voice that could make you forget your name. He walked into the non-profit fundraiser I was volunteering at like he already owned the place. And maybe, in some ways, he did. He looked at me like I was the only thing worth noticing in the room, and that kind of attention. It's magnetic when you've grown up being ignored. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. We fell fast. Too fast, my friends said. But he made me feel seen, needed, chosen. Within 6 months, we moved in together. At a year, he proposed. Everyone said I was lucky. Richard came from money, had a spotless reputation, and loved to tell people how special I was. He made it seem like I was the center of his world, but that was the trick. Because what I didn't realize at first was that being someone's everything can also mean being their hostage. The changes came slowly, like a dripping faucet in the middle of the night. You ignore it at first. Started with small corrections. That color doesn't suit you. Try the blue one. Don't post that, it sounds desperate. You know you're overthinking this, right? Just trust me. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He never had to. Instead, he made me feel like I was always on the verge of embarrassing myself, like he was the only buffer between me and the cruel world. It became easier to let him speak for me, make decisions for me, explain me to others. And I let him because I loved him. 'Cause I thought he knew best. Had friends once. A group of girls from college who used to come over with wine and stories and loud laughter. He never said not to see them, just dropped comments. You're different from them now. I mean, how long can you keep hanging out with girls who still live like they're 21? And so, I distanced myself. He didn't like my job at the mental health outreach center either. Said it was too draining for someone as sensitive as me. Eventually, I quit. We didn't need the money anyway, he reminded me. I was now home, alone, waiting for him. I'd become a beautiful statue in a pristine house. 3 years into the marriage, I got pregnant. For a brief moment, I thought everything would change. That motherhood would give me an identity beyond Richard's wife. He was delighted publicly. At work functions, he toasted to our growing family. Home, he was distant. He began traveling more. I told myself it was work. The baby Charlotte was born on a snowy January night. Holding her, I cried, not just from joy but relief. I wasn't alone anymore. Richard was different with Charlotte. Formal, dutiful, never warm. He'd hold her for photos, then hand her back like she was a trophy. I did everything else. Nursed her, soothed her, rocked her through colic. Sometimes, I felt like a single mother in a perfect house with a perfect man whose smile never quite reached his eyes. The panic attacks started 6 months postpartum. They came like waves, rising, choking, then gone, leaving me breathless and ashamed. Richard didn't react with compassion. He called it hormonal hysteria, told me I was scaring Charlotte, and that I needed to pull myself together. He insisted I see a therapist, but not just anyone. I'll set it up, he said. We need someone reputable, someone I can trust. That's when I met Dr. Catherine Elridge. First, I hated the idea. A therapist felt like an admission of failure. But Catherine was calm, kind, and more observant than I expected. She never pushed, just listened. Session by session, I started speaking truths I'd never dared to say out loud. Like how I felt erased. How I didn't recognize myself. How Richard made me feel small always. I never called it abuse. Not then. Catherine suggested I start journaling. So I did. I wrote everything. The doubts, the small humiliations, the loneliness. I hid the notebook in a shoebox in Charlotte's old baby carrier in the attic. One day Richard found it. He didn't yell. He just sat there on the edge of the bed, reading it like it was a performance review. When he finished, he looked up at me with a smile so tight it made my skin crawl. So this is how you repay everything I've done for you. He never mentioned it again. But the next week, he filed for separation, citing my mental instability. That's how I ended up in court, being painted as an emotionally unwell mother, unstable and unfit to raise her daughter alone. Richard didn't come across as angry. No, that would have broken the illusion. He came across as concerned. "I just want what's best for Charlotte," he said. "Lila's struggling. She's not herself." He submitted excerpts from my journal as evidence. He submitted medical notes, ones he had access to because he'd arranged the sessions. He even submitted a fabricated incident where I'd supposedly forgotten Charlotte at the grocery store. Complete lie. My lawyer tried to object, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. I could see it in the judge's eyes. The question forming, what if he's right? What if she's not stable enough? I was drowning in a case built out of my own confessions. Until Catherine appeared. It was during the second hearing that she walked in, unannounced, and requested to speak to the judge privately. She handed over a sealed envelope, one I'd never seen before. I only found out later that she had written it weeks ago, after something Richard had said during one of his own sessions. You see, what Richard didn't know was that he too had once seen Catherine. Before me. Years ago. Back then, he was trying to understand why women always ended up leaving him. Catherine never broke confidentiality, but she did recognize the behavioral patterns when I began therapy. She never interfered until now. And when I took the stand, I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to argue. I just looked at the judge and said, "This is from his therapist." The room went silent after I said it. "This is from his therapist." The judge paused. For the first time since this circus started, she looked at Richard, not me, with curiosity instead of concern. The kind of look that asks, "What haven't you told us?" Richard shifted in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks like it would fix something. But I saw the twitch in his jaw. My attorney, Maria, approached the bench and offered the sealed envelope from Dr. Elridge. Inside was a single-page letter. Not long, not dramatic. Just facts. Straightforward, clinical, damning. The judge read it once, then again, and then looked up. "Let's recess for 15 minutes, she said quietly. "Let me rewind for a moment, because things didn't start unraveling all at once. They cracked slowly. Before Catherine submitted the letter, the trial had felt like a long, slow execution. My reputation, my role as a mother, even my sanity, everything had been on trial. Richard had framed the narrative masterfully. He described me as fragile but sweet, like I was a delicate thing too unstable to manage alone. He brought in a paid expert, some psychologist who'd only reviewed my journal entries and diagnosed me with postpartum complicated adjustment disorder with depressive traits. I'd never met her. He even put his sister on the stand. Margaret, who had never visited our home once in 5 years, sat there and said I was always dramatic, and that Richard had tried so hard to make it work. She cried on cue. The gallery murmured in sympathy. I remember gripping the side of the table, not because I was emotional, but because I was furious. Catherine had warned me she might do something. "I can't testify," she said. "Not unless the court permits. But I can write a letter. I can give you something, if it gets worse." Did. I hadn't known Richard had once sat in her office. She told me that only after the subpoena. She hadn't been my spy. She had been his therapist first years ago, for just 3 sessions. But even in those few hours he'd said too much. Things like, "Women always end up becoming too needy. They twist your love into chains. If you don't control the narrative, they'll make you the villain. They get bored once you stop worshipping them." He wasn't confessing. He thought he was intellectualizing. He believed he was the smartest man in the room. When we returned from recess, the judge addressed the court. "This letter comes from Dr. Catherine Elridge, a licensed clinical psychologist with prior patient history connected to both parties. While she cannot testify without consent, she has submitted her notes and ethical obligations regarding patterns of emotional coercion, control, and reputational manipulation she observed in Mr. Richard Lowell Jensen." Richard stood flustered. "This is unethical," he snapped. "She's breaking confidentiality." She was my therapist. This is outrageous. The judge nodded calmly. The court is aware. But the letter does not contain protected material from confidential sessions. It contains observations regarding behavioral consistency observed between two separate patients, both of whom were seen years apart. You waived confidentiality when you authorized the release of medical records for discovery. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. I saw something I never thought I'd see in him. Panic. From that moment on, the room changed. It was subtle at first. The way the clerk looked at him. The way Margaret suddenly crossed her arms instead of leaning forward in support. People started to wonder. Maria leaned over and whispered, "It's not enough to win yet, but it cracked the ceiling. Let's hit harder." And we did. We submitted voice transcripts. Conversations Catherine had prompted me to record months earlier when she suspected emotional abuse. They were casual chats, nothing explosive. But they told a story. Him saying things like, "Don't wear that, you'll embarrass me again. I'll explain it for you, you always twist things. You're too emotional for serious decisions, babe." The judge listened and took notes. Then I took the stand. Not as a victim. Not to cry or beg for pity. I spoke like a mother. Like a woman who had crawled back from the edge and found clarity on the other side. I told them about the first time Richard corrected how I spoke to the pediatrician. About the way he would intercept birthday invitations so I wouldn't be the one to RSVP. How he'd repack Charlotte's diaper bag when we went out, always with a look that said you forgot again, even when I hadn't. I told them how he loved being seen as a doting father in public, but couldn't hold his daughter for more than 10 minutes at home without getting bored. I used to think I was crazy, I said. Then I realized I was just exhausted from trying to be someone he wouldn't abandon. Richard tried to regain control during his own testimony. He leaned into his charm, flashing his practiced smile and using terms like emotional support and mental wellness. But Maria was ready. "Mr. Jensen," she asked, "are you familiar with the term gaslighting?" "I've heard it, yes," he replied. "Would you say you've ever gaslight your wife?" "Absolutely not." She raised an eyebrow. "Not even when you told her she dreamed up your infidelity? Or when you claimed she imagined the email thread between you and a paralegal named Denise?" He hesitated. "That was taken out of context." Maria pulled up the printed emails. And then, one by one, showed the jury the responses. All real, all cruelly sarcastic, where he mocked my reactions. "I guess your therapist told you this too. Don't you have a journal to go cry in? Maybe if you didn't act like a Victorian widow, I'd still want to come home." Richard tried to explain. But no one was listening anymore. They weren't seeing a husband anymore. They were seeing a calculated manipulator unraveling on the stand. On the final day of arguments, Maria submitted one last piece of evidence. A drawing. Crayon on paper. A little girl standing next to a woman with big brown eyes. A heart above them. Written in careful kid letters. "Me and Mommy. Mommy makes me safe." No mention of a dad. No man in the drawing. It wasn't just sad. It was truthful. When the judge returned for her verdict, her tone was slow, thoughtful. "I have reviewed not only the legal arguments but the emotional tone of this case. This is not a matter of competence or income. This is about environment, about patterns, about control masked as care, and silence enforced through fear. Miss Jensen," she said, turning to me, "you are granted full residential custody of Charlotte. Mr. Jensen, you may petition for supervised visitation after completing a court-mandated emotional coercion rehabilitation program." And just like that, the sentence that ended it wasn't even mine. It was Catherine's. But the war, the rebuilding, that was all me. The courtroom verdict didn't bring immediate peace. That's the part no one talks about. When the judge says the words, you expect the doors to burst open and the sunshine to follow. But leaving an abuser, especially one who made you doubt yourself for years, isn't an ending. It's the beginning of reconstruction. The first night after the ruling, I didn't sleep. I lay on the mattress with Charlotte curled against me, staring at the ceiling of our rental apartment. It smelled like someone else's life. Cheap detergent, new paint, second-hand furniture. But it was mine. Oh, mine. There were no surveillance cameras for safety. No passive-aggressive notes. No locked drawers. No perfume mysteriously disappearing after a guest complimented me. Just me. And my daughter. And a space no one else had ever controlled. I didn't follow the media coverage at first. But Maria texted me 3 days after the hearing. Your ex-husband's firm placed him on indefinite leave. Public backlash. Guess people didn't love the letter. Turns out someone in the courtroom had leaked it. Not the letter itself, but the existence of the letter. A therapist who once saw Richard had submitted documentation supporting a narrative of coercion and manipulation. The news picked it up fast, especially since Richard had previously co-chaired a legal ethics committee in New York. You can't gaslight the whole internet. Comments on LinkedIn. This is the guy who lectures women on resilience. Always knew that charm was fake. Funny how fast concerned father becomes exposed narcissist. And just like that, the man who controlled the narrative for years couldn't even control the hashtags under his name. Weeks later, I got an email from Margaret, his sister. It started like a ceasefire. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. He always told us you were fragile, emotional. Thought you needed him. I believed him. I'm sorry I helped him hurt you. There was no real apology. But there was recognition. That meant something. I saw Catherine one last time. She wasn't my therapist anymore. I'd moved on to someone new, someone with experience in post-coercion trauma recovery. But I wanted to thank her. Really thank her. She poured me tea. Same office. Same quiet lamp. Same scent of lavender oil she always diffused. You never told me exactly what you wrote, I said. She smiled softly. It wasn't what I wrote. It's what I remembered. People like Richard. They leave fingerprints, not just on one person, but everyone they try to shape. She handed me a folded note, just a copy of the letter, now declassified and cleared from my records. I read it in my car, and for the first time I cried not from fear or anger, but from relief. In both separate therapy engagements, I witnessed an identical emotional framework, an insistence on controlling perception, an aggressive defense against personal vulnerability, and an instinctive attempt to recast others' emotions as manipulations. Mr. Jensen displayed a clinical pattern of reputational dominance, subtle gaslighting, and narrative control, symptoms common in emotional coercion cases. Miss Jensen, seen years later, mirrored the typical trauma imprint: indecision, internalized blame, and a near-total loss of self-trust. These are not coincidences. They are consequences. That last line stuck with me. Not coincidences. Consequences. Charlotte blossomed in ways I couldn't have imagined. In our tiny apartment, she made castles out of couch cushions. She dressed up in my scarves and called herself Queen of the Cozy Kingdom. She painted on every surface she could reach and demanded I frame her art. She still asked about Richard. Not often. But when she did, I never lied. Daddy's figuring some things out, I'd say. Is he still mad? She asked once. No, honey. He's just learning. It wasn't about protecting him. It was about not letting his brokenness break her. One night, after Charlotte was asleep, I sat down and wrote a letter. To myself. To the girl I was. The one who thought love meant shrinking herself to fit into someone else's world. Dear Lila, he never loved you the way you needed. But that doesn't mean you were unlovable. He told you that your feelings were too much, because if you believed him, he wouldn't have to feel guilty for breaking you. He said you were unstable, because he knew one day you'd become strong enough to leave. He kept you isolated, because even a flicker of someone else's light would expose his shadow. But look at you now. You stood in front of the court and told the truth without shaking. You let a letter speak when your voice had been stolen. You reclaimed your daughter. You reclaimed yourself. And no matter what he lost, you won something bigger. Yourself. Me. 6 months later, I ran into Richard. Of all places, it was at the grocery store. He looked smaller. Not physically, but in presence. He was alone. No assistant. No polished jacket. No cufflinks. Just a man in a line buying soup and frozen meals. He saw me. We locked eyes. He opened his mouth. Maybe to apologize, maybe to reclaim control. But I smiled gently and said, "I hope you're healing." Then I turned and walked away. He had once controlled every piece of my world. Now he didn't even get a second of it. I never imagined power could be so quiet. That it could live in warm dinners with my daughter. In silence that didn't feel like punishment. In decisions I made without second guessing. I didn't win a fortune. I didn't get revenge in headlines. What I got was better. Got me back. And sometimes that's all it takes. Just one sentence to end the control. But 1,000 quiet choices to rebuild your freedom. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of